This is BBC News. I'm Sean Lay. The headlines at 10. Work to restore NHS computer systems will continue throughout the weekend following the cyber attack. The Home Secretary says it's not known who is responsible.
We're working very hard to make sure that we help the NHS put their systems back in order, and so far we've had reassurance from them that no patient data has been compromised.
Thousands of organisations in around 100 countries are known to have been affected by the international attack. Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson has warned his party faces a Margaret Thatcher-style landslide defeat if it doesn't improve ahead of the election. Pope Francis will canonise 2 Portuguese children today at Mass in Fatima, on the spot where they reported seeing the Virgin Mary exactly 100 years ago. Also in the next hour, from horse heads to monkeys, it can only be Eurovision. Or will the UK be able to blame a Brexit backlash this year if we lose? We'll look ahead to tonight's event. In sport, Chelsea are triumphant and win the Premier League title in Antonio Conte's first season in charge. And a group of young people living in Mumbai tell BBC Life stories about their hopes and dreams. India's Millennials is half an hour time here on BBC News. Hello, very good morning to you. Welcome to BBC News. Routine appointments and operations at some hospitals remain cancelled this morning after NHS organisations across England and Scotland were disrupted by a global cyber attack. Some doctors have been unable to access patient records, while a number of hospitals are asking patients not to attend unless it's urgent. There's no evidence that patient information has been stolen. The first indication that something was wrong was mid-afternoon yesterday when some hospital trusts and GP surgeries reported being locked out of their computers. Vital information such as patient records and appointment schedules were inaccessible. It meant operations were cancelled, patients were sent home and ambulances were diverted. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd says that around 45 trusts and some surgeries in England and Scotland have been affected. Prime Minister Theresa May said the incident was not an attack on the NHS, but part of a wider problem affecting up to 100 countries. Work to restore NHS computer systems will now continue throughout the weekend. Here's our correspondent, Richard Slee.
This was the message that popped up on countless computers across the NHS. It says the system is locked and no files can be accessed until a ransom is paid. The cyber attack had an immediate effect on patient services. This man's heart operation in London was cancelled.
Yeah, I was all cannulaed up. I daren't show you mine. I've been shaved down the front because they were going to open me up. My arms have been shaved, so I was all ready to go, nil by mouth.
As well as hospitals in England, about half of the health boards in Scotland have been affected in some way. But there have been no cyber attacks on health services in Wales or Northern Ireland. One theory is that the NHS may have been vulnerable because it was using old computer systems that didn't have the latest updates.
This kind of sustained wide attack on an organisation does force it to look at its IT update regime, making sure not only are its operating systems up to scratch, but its protective regimes are up to scratch. And I think it's probably worth the NHS and the National Cybersecurity Centre looking at that to make sure there were not any basic health measures that could have been put in place which would have stopped this before they look at the wider, longer-term investment necessity for an organisation which is quite clearly so IT dependent.
The Home Secretary Amber Rudd is confident that patients' information hasn't been compromised and says that not only will ransoms not be paid, but efforts are underway to find out who is responsible.
We're talking to international partners because this is an international attack. So we have good relationships with different countries who've been impacted, and we're sharing information to find out how best to address it, how best to end it, but also how to find out who has done it and how to make sure we have the right defences going forward.
It's not just the NHS in the UK that's been the victim of this cyber attack. It's now thought that organisations in as many as 99 countries have been hit, including the USA, China and Russia. Ransomware is now a common form of cybercrime, which often arrives in a link attached to an email. If clicked on, the malware downloads and quickly infects the computer. Then a message to unlock the data. Microsoft had warned about a threat to its operating systems a couple of months ago, and this morning it announced that it's rolled out a new update for users of older operating systems, including Windows XP. Disruption in the NHS is expected to last for some days, but emergency admissions are not affected. Richard Slee, BBC News.
Well, with me is Brian Glick, who's Editor-in-Chief of Computer Weekly. Brian, thanks for being with us on BBC News. Let me ask you, first of all, we're told that patient information won't have been compromised. Can you explain why that is? How is it that the kind of effectively the computers can be disabled, but somehow the information is safe?
What this ransomware is doing is affecting PCs running Microsoft Windows. So what it's doing is stopping people from accessing all the systems that they would use in running a hospital. Now, theoretically, the way it's likely to be, patient record on a bigger computer somewhere else, and all people are doing is using that PC to access those records. So there's no evidence yet that this ransomware has yet deleted data, nor that it is copying data from elsewhere. It's simply a question of it having put a software wall up that stops you getting beyond it.
So the issue might be if you've got information stored locally on your particular terminal, the one you use, that's where there could be a vulnerability.
Yes, that's right. So, you know, if a senior doctor keeps some important information locally on their PC, or if the chief executive of a trust keeps, maybe some important financial information on there, potentially that is at risk. If it hasn't been backed up, and in theory it should have been, but these things never always go the way they should. If that hasn't been backed up and they have to wipe that PC and start again, then potentially they could lose that data. A
lot of people are getting exercised over the fact that the NHS is using a Windows operating system that is quite a few years out of date. It's not even supported anymore if problems arise with it. Should we be that worried about it? Because from what you're saying, that may be the issue on the terminals that people are using on their desks. It might not necessarily be the issue with the big computer that actually hosts all the critical data.
Yeah, in theory, it shouldn't be an issue, as you say, with the patient records. The fact that the NHS is using this old version of Windows called Windows XP is an issue because it's not supported by Microsoft anymore. So where flaws are found in it, Microsoft don't fix those flaws anymore. So it makes it very vulnerable.
It's striking looking at some of the information. We had an article in the British Medical Journal, which was only published the day before, warning that there was going to be, in this particular doctor's view, an attack by the end of the year, sort of flagging up the vulnerability. I saw some information, just looking at my notes here. The US Department of Homeland Security says Microsoft released a security patch 2 months. People don't seem to have updated or used it. And in December, it was reported that nearly all NHS were using an obsolete version of Windows. So people have known, it's not just they've woken up yesterday and thought, oh, blimey, we didn't realise. That information has been out there, and yet people don't appear to have acted on it.
It's a sad fact that something like 95% of all cyber attacks happen around known flaws. What's needed is the discipline to make sure that you're updating software when updates come out, so these patches, these fixes to the flaws are applied, such as the one that exists here. Clearly, most of the organisations that have been affected by this particular ransomware hadn't done that. Also, every cybersecurity expert will say to you, don't use old software that is no longer supported, such as Windows XP. So ultimately, this could have been avoided. It's a management decision at the end of the day as to what you prioritise and whether you have the discipline to apply all of the cybersecurity processes that you could have.
We now have a National Cybersecurity Centre. Presumably they are the people who are going to be reading the Riot Act to the public sector and saying, right, if you haven't got your act together on this, you need to do it, and you need to do it now.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the National Cybersecurity Centre, will provide all the advice, will tell people what to do, but at the end of the day, the NHS is a federation of several hundred different organisations who have their own budgets, their own IT managers, their own IT security people, and all the NCSC can really do is shout at them and say, you've got to do this. At the end of the day, it takes somebody to make a management decision to say, we're going to spend some money on addressing this.
Brian Glick, thank you very much. Good to speak to you. Pleasure. Really helpful to kind of get us around some of these quite complicated issues. Very grateful. Thanks very much. Labour's deputy leader Tom Watson has warned the Conservative Party could win a Margaret Thatcher-style landslide if it maintains its current lead in the opinion polls. Mr Watson told The Guardian it would be very, very difficult to turn the poll numbers around, and Labour had a mountain to climb, but the party was determined to do it. Mrs Thatcher won majorities of 144 in 1983 and 101 in 1987. Meanwhile, the Conservatives want to give people the power to demand that social media companies delete any embarrassing content they posted online before the age of 18. They're proposing legislation where firms would be fined if they refuse to comply. But Labour has questioned whether the legislation would be enforceable, given that most of the largest companies are based abroad. With me as our political correspondent, Leila Nathu. Good morning to you, Leila. Let's start with, we'll start with the Conservatives first, since we just talked about that, and it fits rather neatly with what we're talking about in terms of the cybersecurity question. It's not the first time the government has talked, the Conservative Party has talked about changing the law. How effective can this be to legislate in the UK if these companies are international?
Well, that is the question, and I think that that is not something that's been answered by these proposals that have been spelled out today. It is coincidental, I should say, that the Conservatives have put this out. I think this was a part of their campaign. They've been planning to do this a long time. It obviously seems a little bit more pertinent today, given what's happened. But this idea that social media users should be able to delete posts or embarrassing photos that might come back to haunt them before they were the age of 18. You know, the Conservatives obviously think this is a popular policy. They think that this is a vote winner because, yeah, plenty of us have embarrassing things we might not want to see later on in life. But of course, it does raise the question of how it is going to be enforced, and certainly Labour and the Lib Dems are picking up on this and saying it's completely undeliverable, it's tough talk, but actually there's not much to it. There are a couple of other ideas bound up with these measures as well. Things like making it easier to do business online, asking social media companies to do more to protect children from harmful content. But, you know, the Home Secretary Amber Rudd this morning has been saying, look, we are working with social media companies, so, you know, but not too much detail in what we've seen so far.
Tom Watson's interview, on one level it's a statement of the blinking obvious that, yes, if their poll lead is maintained, of course they're going to end up with a three-figure majority. But the other interesting thought here is that he is effectively saying to his party, we're staring into the abyss in the middle of an election campaign, when politicians usually spend the time going, we're going to win, it's going to be marvellous, everything's going to plan. He seems to be saying, no, it's not going to plan.
Yeah, it's pretty morose, and I think that there will be plenty of people out there who think that this is an unhelpful intervention. This is Labour's...
the deputy leader of the party.
I was just about to say, the deputy leader. I mean, let's not forget that the relations between Tom Watson and Jeremy Corbyn have, you know, to put it mildly, been fractious at some...
It's not a dream team. They didn't run together.
No,
and, yeah.
it's not a harmonious relationship all the time, shall we say. So, you know, there could be a little bit of jostling positioning going on with this, but, you know, it's a candid assessment, really, of what Labour's prospects are. Polls have the Conservatives up to 20 points in the lead. Of course, we know that polls are not super reliable always, but there certainly is a mountain to climb, in the words of Tom Watson.
And the implications, I suppose, of his remarks are that actually there is nothing in what he is finding on the ground or in private polling that contradicts what the public view is, otherwise he presumably wouldn't be saying this.
Yeah, and he's talking specifically about Labour supporters getting behind their local candidates. So, you know, no mention of getting behind Jeremy Corbyn or, you know, going for a future Labour government. It's all about kind of putting your local MPs back in Parliament to be your champions. Now, you know, the implication is that, look, if we don't do this, Theresa May is going to get a huge majority. She'll be able to push through anything she wants in government because there'll be no parliamentary opposition. So this is a bit of a warning to say, look, if we don't turn out, if we don't actually get behind, perhaps it's an admission, a bit of resignation that Labour can at best hope to be in opposition and actually better not be a diminished one.
It's not going to make him very popular, as you say, with some of his colleagues. Thank you very much, Leila Nathu, our political correspondent there. The US President Donald Trump has refused to confirm or deny whether the White House secretly records his telephone calls and meetings. Yesterday, the president appeared to warn the former FBI Director James Comey that his administration could produce tapes of their conversations if he spoke to the media. Democrat leaders in Congress have demanded an explanation. Right, you're watching BBC News. It's 14 minutes past 10. Let's take a look at the headlines. The NHS faces a weekend of disruption following a large-scale cyber attack which has caused hospitals to delay treatments and cancel appointments. Thousands of organisations around the world have been affected by the malicious software known as ransomware, with reports of infections in about 100 countries. Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson has warned of the Conservatives winning a Margaret Thatcher-style landslide if they maintain their current lead in the opinion polls.
Now, Johnny Brownie made a dramatic return to the World Triathlon Series in treacherous conditions in Yokohama, Japan. He was caught up in a crash on the last lap of the bike leg and sent flying over the railings there. But he carried his damaged bike to the transition point so he could get his running shoes on before eventually finishing down in 42nd place. You can see highlights tomorrow at 1 o'clock on BBC Two. Gloucester lost 25-17 to Stade Francais in Rugby Union's Challenge Cup final at Murrayfield. An interception from Johnny May gave Gloucester a 10-0 lead, and they were racing towards this trophy for the third time, it seemed, with May having all the time in the world. But Stade Francais, well, they're fed up of being runners-up, as in 4 previous finals, and so this one they finally won. And today it's the turn of Saracens, who'll be hoping to retain their European Champions Cup title when they take on French side Clermont-Auvergne. Now, in Rugby League, Salford Red Devils came from behind to beat Hull Kingston Rovers and so make it into the quarter-finals of the Challenge Cup. They were losing at half-time, but then scored 18 unanswered points to win 24-14 in the end. And although there were wins also for Wakefield and Holders Hull. Time to tell you that final practice is now underway for the Spanish Grand Prix. There's live text commentary on that on the BBC Sport website, where you'll also find more on all of today's stories indeed. Just go to bbc.co.uk/sport. I'll have more for you, Sean, in the next hour. See you then.
Mike, thank you very much. Drayton Manor theme park is reopening today, 4 days after an 11-year-old girl died after falling from a ride. Eva Janath from Leicester fell from a boat on the Splash Canyon ride. The park's owners say the ride will remain shut, along with ones that overlook it, as a mark to her family. The captain of the shipwrecked cruise liner, the Costa Concordia, has begun his 16-year jail term after Italy's highest court upheld the sentence. 32 people died when the vessel hit the rocks off an Italian island 5 years ago. Captain Francesco Schettino was also convicted of abandoning his ship before the passengers and crew. Pope Francis is canonising 2 Portuguese children who had visions of the Virgin Mary beginning exactly 100 years ago today at a mass at the spot where they reported seeing her. Let's take a look at those pictures now live from Fatima. This is a story you may well have heard many times over the years. 2 young shepherds, a brother and a sister, who were 7 and 9 at the time, said that they saw a vision of the Virgin Mary. Apparently she came to them, appeared before them 3 times. One of her warnings was there would be a second conflict. This, remember, was during the run-up in partway through the First World War, 3 years into the First World War. She appeared 3 times between May 1917 and October 1917. Sadly, the children themselves died soon afterwards because of the Spanish influenza epidemic that swept through Europe in the immediate aftermath of the First World War. Spectacular crowds there for a turnout, a hugely important event, of course, for any Catholic country to have the Pope visiting, but to have him visiting for an occasion of this kind, very special. They weren't the only children there. Their cousin, Lucia, was there, but Lucia lived on. She survived the flu epidemic, and she grew up into adulthood. She became a nun, and she even met, I think, John Paul II. The Pope, he beatified Jacinta and Francisco in 2000, but they've been waiting for miracles to be declared. The Church has now declared 2 miracles which it's attributed to the pair, and that of course allows them to be given this very special declaration that they are now saints of the Catholic Church. A beautiful day in Fatima. It's a special shrine there that has been celebrated for many years for that first appearance claimed by those shepherd children of the Virgin Mary 100 years ago today. Now, last night a junior doctor won MasterChef. 29-year-old Saliha Mahmoud Ahmed from Watford became the 13th amateur cook to be named champion. Before we meet her, let's take a quick look at the highlights from last night's final episode.
Now only the 3 most talented remain.
Steve has not ceased to amaze me from the moment he walked in. through round after round after round. You can cook, you can cook. What a time, I think, to present the best dish you've done in the competition by a country mile.
Delicious, superb, fantastic, extraordinary. It's dreamy.
I think the whole thing is absolutely delicious. There is the familiar and the unusual. And it comes together for me in quite a thrilling way.
I'm really, really blown away by this. I think it's delicious. Our MasterChef champion 2017 is Salia.
Lovely moment. I bet you could watch that again and again, couldn't you, Salia? Good morning to you, by the way.
Good morning, good morning.
You record these things in advance, so was it slightly strange watching the programme going out? Because you presumably had kind of got used to it, even though presumably also a secret you had to keep.
You know, we had to keep it a secret for a little while, but in actual fact it's so overwhelming when it comes out. It's just absolutely lovely. People have been so supportive and amazing. I've just been thrilled to bits. It's fantastic.
How far did you think you might get?
Do you know what? I had absolutely no idea. I think my family and friends had much more confidence in me than I had in myself. I had only ever cooked to please my family before, so cooking for the judges was a brand new experience for me.
And one that moved John Torode at least to tears.
I know, I couldn't believe it. You know, I think John and Greg are just wonderful, and they're so emotional about food, and that reflected on the camera, and it's just wonderful to see.
Did you, one of the positive things about MasterChef, I think, just as a viewer, having nothing to do with the programme, is that it does look like they want to be supportive, and in some of these sort of reality shows where people are performing a task, it almost feels like the judges are going out of their way to make you feel bad about what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, John and Greg are really, really supportive on the show. They encourage you to improve yourself and learn. Their critique is essential to us getting better as chefs and cooks as well. So, you know, without them, our development wouldn't be possible. So, you know, I think it's just fantastic, and they are exactly how you see it on screen.
Has this kind of tempted you to think maybe whether you could consider a career as a chef?
Well, you know, I'm always going to be a doctor, but yes, I think there is huge room to combine food in my life.
Because your specialism is gastroenterology, isn't it?
Yeah, and in many ways that's completely linked to food. I would love to develop recipes in the future for people with celiac disease and irritable bowel syndrome, as well as cooking and writing in my own style. So I think, you know, lots and lots of things that I would absolutely love to do.
Is it a bit frustrating sometimes when you talk to patients about their diet and you think, why are they eating this?
Well, you know, the diet's a big, big topic, and you know, it's frustration aside, we want to help all of our patients. So no, frustration isn't the word that would come to mind.
Well, let me ask you about your menu then, because I mean, I have to say I haven't eaten properly yet this morning, and maybe it did start my stomach rumbling. reading about the venison shami kebab, and this one. What's a kachumba salad?
A kachumba is a traditional Indian Pakistani salad, which lots of lemon juice and chili and herbs and lots of salad leaves cut very, very finely. It's a very traditional salad.
And I'm very partial to panna cottas, I tell you. That was sensational.
Aren't we all partial to a panna cotta?
We're going to have to talk about this again, clearly. But one of the things I was going to ask you about is what was the part of, it doesn't necessarily have to be last night's winner, but what during the course of the series was the dish that you were most nervous about cooking?
What was I most nervous about cooking? Actually, I was most nervous in South Africa, cooking that beautiful South African lamb over the braai in 40 degrees heat. That was the most incredible experience, and I did not want to mess it up or burn that beautiful meat. So for me, that was a highlight, really.
And you certainly didn't. What are you going to do tonight? Is it a big slap-up meal? Are you celebrating and family going out?
Do you know what? I think tonight I'm going to have to go back to the comfort of my mum's food. After a wonderful but busy day, I think that's what you need.
Yeah, you never beat your mum's food. You're absolutely right. I agree about that.
You can't really. You really
and
can't.
I'm sure your son and your husband will be very glad to have you back after all these months of additional hard work.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that everybody has enjoyed the show, and it's just wonderful to have all of this support. I really thank everybody for it.
Sally Hart, thank you very much for entertaining us so much over the last few weeks and for being with us this morning on BBC News.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Now, tonight is the Eurovision Song Contest, and after failing to make it into the top 10 for the past 7 years, could this be the year Britain bounces back? Lucy Jones is going to be representing the UK in tonight's competition in Ukraine. Our Moscow correspondent, bit of an expert on Eurovision, Steve Rosenberg, is in Kiev, and he's been to meet the contestants.
It's Eurovision 2017, and it's all rather confusing. Take Azerbaijan's entry. A horse head on a ladder. Why?
The audience is not understanding it. I'm leaving the whole meaning to them.
Ah.
Audience is not understanding it. I'm leaving the whole meaning to them.
Ah. Well, that's clear then. And what's going on with one of the favourites, Italy, this year?
Why the monkey? Why the ape?
The monkey, Francesco Gabbani tells me, is a symbol that at the end of the day, we're all naked apes.
So we stay
Among the front runners are Bulgaria and Portugal. But what about the UK?
You know, there was a time when the United Kingdom was always a contender in Eurovision. We always seemed to be in with a shot at the top spot. More recently, though, we've been propping up the table. But could this be the year that Britain is back?
At rehearsals, Lucy Jones has been wowing everyone with her power ballad, Never Give Up on You.
From Eurovision, I'm really hoping that I will go home with the respect of the nation who watched the show at home.